Welcome to the Tech and Space Leader Show, where we learn lessons from leaders of the next frontier. I am your host, Lisa Dreher, and I'm really excited to introduce our guest for today, Nathan Kundtz. He is the CEO and co-founder of Rendered.ai. Welcome to the show, Nathan.
Thanks so much. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, thanks for making time to be here. Perhaps you can give us a little bit of background on yourself and Rendered.ai to get started here.
Yeah, absolutely. Because the two stories kind of mesh together. So, I'm actually a physicist by training. Did my PhD work at Duke University in a field called metamaterials, and then came out to the West Coast originally to incubate those and find ways to build companies, and that led to the creation of a satellite communications company, Lisa, that we worked together on for a while called Kymeta. So that was a lot of fun. And Kymeta continues to do well, but I stepped away from the business in 2018 and started to do a number of different things with venture capital firms and began to find ways to work with a lot of small businesses in the space industry. And as part of that work, I saw, like, since I started, over 100 companies at this point, and started to see these themes in how they began to operate. And one of the things was there were so many new ideas for the types of data that we could collect in space. So all sorts of different sensors to sensing modalities, tools that we could deploy because of the reduction in cost for accessing space. And these were coming out of some of the best national labs and universities in the world. And so you'd meet with these teams and you'd say, okay, cool, like, this is really exciting, right? We're gonna detect methane plumes or deforestation or crop rust or natural disaster management. But what's the business model? And they'd go, well, here's the thing. Nobody wants to buy raw data. Our customers need to buy information. They need to buy analytics. And you go, that makes sense. That, not everybody has like hyperspectral analysts ready to buy a bunch of your data and then figure something out from it. They need to kind of figure it out for them. And so how are you going to do that? And they'd go, well, we're going to use AI. You'd say, yeah, of course you are. Of course you are. Everybody's going to use AI. Let's rub some AI in it. But just for kicks, how are you going to do that? And they'd say, well, here's the thing. In order to train the AI, we need to have a lot of data. And, our satellite hasn't launched yet, so we don't have any data. So here's the plan. We're going to raise $200 million. We're going to build satellites for 3 years. We're going to launch a bunch of them into space. We're going to collect a bunch of data. Then we're going to annotate it. And then we're going to figure out, if we can help anybody. And
Oh, wow.
yeah. So you'd see this kind of, I'm paraphrasing obviously, but you'd see this over and over again. And it really led to some reflection on my part. It's like, wait a minute, is it just that I'm dealing with academics that don't understand that you can't build a business in that way? And so I just got curious about the problem, and I started looking at other markets, right? Is this just the space industry? Or is this a challenge that we see elsewhere? And it turned out, same problem in manufacturing, where if you want to figure out what sorts of sensors to deploy and you're going to make a big infrastructure buy, the engineering approach is buy a bunch of sensors and then figure out what happens after you've collected data over years. If you're doing something in healthcare, same thing. Like, how do we design the next X-ray systems where it's an AI tool that's going to be doing the analysis instead of a doctor? And nobody had really good answers. It all basically boiled down to the engineering is broken. And so what we're going to do is build something, spend a whole bunch of money, and then, later on we'll build the software for it.
Yeah.
And that seemed like a big enough problem that the world deserved sort of an infrastructure solution, like real tools that could address it. And being a physicist, I thought, hey, we can simulate a lot of these data sets. We don't need to collect them from the real world. But in order to do that, we've got to be able to generate digital twins at scale with lots of diversity. Then we've got to be able to pipeline that into sophisticated simulation tools. We've got to kind of make that all configurable by a computer vision engineer. And so there's a suite of tools that's kind of missing in the industry, and that has become Rendered.ai.
Wow. Okay, that's amazing. And I think you've already kind of like jumped into things here because obviously, I mean, AI is becoming more and more a part of our everyday lives, whether we, I guess, realize it or not. And but yet there are gaps, and there are I guess um, when data comes back or responses come back from AI, they're not always reliable, let's say.
Sure.
So how do you, I guess, just in that initial area, how do you look at those gaps that are impacting, I guess, the viability of AI generated responses and address that?
Yeah. No, it's a great question. I actually want to like step back for just a minute and point out that this is no different than any form of engineering. There's no tool that we build that doesn't have limitations, right? And what we do as engineers and then as users of those tools is we try to understand those limitations, and then we use the tool in a way that respects those limitations, right? We build bridges. You can't put anything on a bridge, but you build a bridge for an intended purpose that has some capability, et cetera. So the challenge is actually, I think it's helpful to think about the problem not as like, oh, AI isn't perfect. How can we make it perfect? Because you can't. That doesn't make any sense. It's not a well-posed engineering challenge. The thing that we want to be able to do is design these tools so that they can operate within some known bounds and operate successfully within those bounds. And so really what that boils down to is testing and then debugging to be able to engineer them to that approach. And the big change, so this is how you would do it with any form of software or hardware engineering, right? You design to the test set. The challenge that we have with artificial intelligence that really makes it different, well, there's maybe two challenges. One, it's a black box, so we really, even more than in other circumstances, rely heavily on being able to test. And the second is that the behavior is defined by the data that we use to train it. And so we can't get in and just like edit the code in order to address edge cases. We actually have to introduce those edge cases into our data set. And so I think this is like fundamentally what synthetic data is about trying to do. It's taking these questions about AI capabilities and turning them into engineering problems that can actually be addressed.
Right, right, right. Okay, so you've mentioned synthetic data a couple of times. What is synthetic data?
Ooh, do we have a couple hours? Is it okay?
No, give us
No,
the
we
give
didn't.
us give us the 101 version.
Yeah, so there's a lot of different types of synthetic data, first of all, and I'm not going to get into all of them. What we focus on is imagery and perception data. So things that you might collect from a camera or sensor. So everything from X-ray to radar data, certainly RGB cameras, hyperspectral cameras, that kind of thing. And those are important for training the parts of AI associated with perception and understanding the world, and what's in it. And specifically, we focus on what's called physics-based synthetic data. Synthetic data itself is this concept of we want to generate data to train AI. Okay, we want control over that process. There are a lot of different approaches. In imagery, we can use either sort of simulations or we can use generative tools. You're probably familiar with like Midjourney and some of these other like pure generative tools. If you rely on the generative tools to generate data, you often find that you get model collapse. Like they don't know enough about the edge cases to produce them accurately. Like if you go to those tools and ask them for an accurate X-ray image, they can't do that. And so we do have to use physics-based simulation and essentially inject new information into the process by doing that. And that's what we specialize in.
Got it. Okay. So maybe can you give us an example of how synthetic data, maybe in a particular use case, has helped overcome some of the, data-driven, whatever examples or uses of AI?
Yeah, absolutely. So you may be seeing right now in some like LinkedIn posts and things that Planet has just started releasing information about methane detections, right?
Yeah.
So they had to build those tools and design their constellation before deploying, and they used Rendered.ai to provide that synthetic data for hyperspectral simulations of methane plumes. And so that was how that analytics stack got built, and also how that they've been able to use that data set to sort of uh, feed their partners with realistic data sets ahead of the actual deployment of that constellation.
Right, right, right. Okay. So AI, if you just look at the mainstream news, there's a lot of stories about all the benefits and then all of the risks of AI. What are your perspectives on this? What are the biggest opportunities, and then maybe what are some of the biggest risks or challenges?
Yeah. So first of all, it feels a lot like 1994 in the internet to me. Like for those of us who are kind of around, like I feel like a lot of what's happening in engineering AI, especially around large language models, feels a little bit like when you were building your first websites and you're like, like it's not even quite 1997 yet. Like we don't all have web browsers yet. We're still mostly on AOL. um,
Yeah.
and and so there's this sort of groundswell of capabilities that I think is really exciting, but it will change everything in the same way that I think the internet has largely changed everything. And like we can have this conversation, we can broadcast to people all over the world in a way that we couldn't before. And so that will come with a lot of opportunities. I think it's incredibly exciting, but obviously, yeah, there will be challenges that are uncovered. I don't know that I'm in a good place to sort of enumerate all of them, but
Yeah.
obviously, one of the things that I think is really interesting is it's changing for a lot of people how we access information, right? What has historically been, hey, I'm reading it in a book, or I'm getting it from like a Google search or some website. Now I'm going to ChatGPT or other tools, and I'm using those not just to sort of access information, but to teach myself, because then I can continue to ask follow-up questions. So that's one of the areas that I think will be heavily impacted in the next few years.
Great, great. Okay, so earlier in the conversation, you alluded to some of the use cases for rendered AI's solution. Maybe we can dig into that a little bit further. What are some of the use cases that rendered AI is being used for today?
Yeah, so we've done a lot in remote sensing. So everything from object detection and anomaly detection to like new constellation design. We're working in healthcare with things like being able to identify patients when they're under covers or covered by masks and robes, things that wouldn't naturally be in a data set, where pose estimation becomes important because we want to understand the health of the patients. Um, we've worked on X-ray imagery to prevent weapons from entering schools, right? So answering this question of like, how quickly can we detect a weapon under certain circumstances? Like, how should we essentially design that detector to make sure people pass through as quickly as possible? We've done insurance programs, so looking at like yard damage or roof damage. So that gives you maybe a few examples. All of these have this theme of either the sensor didn't exist yet, or the thing that they're looking for is sort of rare, and difficult to collect data on, and then we step in and help address that gap.
Wow, those are really cool and very varied. I mean, that's a pretty broad range of use cases, so that's really really exciting. One of the things that I think comes up oftentimes with AI is this idea of bias influencing the actual AI outputs.
Yeah.
How do we avoid bias in our use of AI?
Yeah, you don't actually,
Ah,
because the reality is the AI is always gonna reflect the data set that was used to train it. That's just true. So when we say bias, usually what we mean is that that data set doesn't reflect how we want it to behave. But the reality is every data set is biased in some way, overrepresentation or underrepresentation based on like how you would anticipate its behavior. What we want to be able to do is engineer the bias,
yeah.
right? So we want to be able to anticipate the performance, engineer the performance, and then be able to test that. So we have done things, for instance, in detecting skin conditions on people that have um, varied complexions, right? So lighter and darker skin, where all the original data set was light complexion people, and that's not a great way to release a product. That's a great example of bias we don't want. Um,
Right.
but in other circumstances, right? Like if I have an X-ray data set, guess what? That data set is biased towards X-ray imagery. If you pass an MRI imagery, it's not going to work. So these things are all biased in some way. What we want to do is kind of get a handle on that and start to control the data that's used for training.
Got it. Got it. Okay, so I want to end with one last question, and I'm really interested to hear what you have to say to this one. And that is, if you could make one prediction about the future of AI, what would it be?
um, I mean, I think it's just going to keep getting bigger. Like, the one thing I'd say is there's a lot of what I would call noise about how we're sort of hitting the limits of AI in these sort of single shot models. GPT-5 is not meeting the performance limits of things, and I think what people are missing in a lot of that conversation is just how powerful the systems are as you get these tools working together. And so a lot of what's going to be happening in the next 5 years is piecing these together. Agentic frameworks, you've probably heard that term, where we start to have AI tools kind of working together and talking to each other. And those are going to be, and already are, but will be increasingly powerful
Yeah.
as we progress.
Excellent. Okay, so if someone wants to learn more about rendered AI, what should they do?
Go to our website, www.rendered.ai, which has some great information, case studies, and you can also sign up for a free account if you want to try it out, or ping us on LinkedIn.
Excellent. Excellent. Nathan, thank you so much for being here today to talk to us about AI and what rendered AI is doing in this space. It's been really, really informative and exciting to hear what you guys are working on.
Thank you. It was a pleasure, Lisa. Thanks very much.
Absolutely. And I do want to take a moment to thank GuideForce for hosting these sessions. To learn more about GuideForce, you can visit guideforce.com. And we'll see you next time on the Tech and Space Leaders Show.